For 3 years now, these front lines have defended a little-known revolution. It's not only ISIS trying to create a new society in the Middle East. In northern Syria, left-wing Kurdish radicals are trying to build a mini-state in an unprecedented political experiment. But this is no caliphate.
هي لكافة جميع العالم اللي موجودين. حماية لكل الطوائف.
It's a grassroots take on representative democracy they say is based on equality, pluralism and self-sufficiency. According to their constitution, in each municipality the top 3 officers have to come from different ethnicities, and at least one must be a woman. This is unprecedented in the Middle East. Garmishli is the biggest city in Rojava. The separation of church and state here means women can dress as they want, and there are no religious restrictions on public behavior. Although many of the Kurds here are from Muslim backgrounds, Rojava has now become something of a sanctuary for minorities from across Syria and beyond. Hussein converted from Islam to Christianity 2 years ago. Apostasy is viewed as unforgivable in many parts of the Middle East, and Rojava is probably one of the few places in this region someone like him can live a normal life. And true to the bottom-up philosophy at work in Rojava, all these internal security force members are nominated by local village committees, not recruited centrally by the government. This security man is an ethnic Arab, but he's sporting an Abdullah Öcalan badge. The famous Kurdish PKK leader is the ideological inspiration for the whole movement here.
القائد عبد الله أوجلان يعمل لصالح جميع الشعوب العربية والكردية والمصرية. قائد إنساني، فكر الإنساني وفلسفة القائد تكون العدل والمساواة بين جميع القوميات العربية والكردية والسريان.
And this fighter is a Christian.
أنا مسيحي. هي لكافة جميع العالم اللي موجودين. حماية لكل الطوائف. إن كان الكرد، إن كان المسيحي، إن كان السرياني، إن كان أي كان للعربي، للكل بدنا السلام والمحبة.
قبل مرات نجيبوا باش حملة كي بالفرة العراق وجرب لز بقرا. من براسي عم بركي خواش من يعني تين تبلي ما بين يعني عم بس عم تكلم. تين ناكل أنا عرب أنا سوريان أنا نوف يا بقيدا يعني هر جدا ملت أنا ي أوروباي تين تبليان وانيام سكتش.
In einem anderen Teil des Camps treffe ich einen 55-Jährigen, der sich Rustem Chudi nennt. Er kommt aus Deutschland, war als Zeitsoldat bei der Bundeswehr und hat 10 Jahre in der Fremdenlegion gekämpft. Seit 8 Monaten unterstützt er die YPG im Kampf gegen den IS.
Ich bin ja der Papa von der Einheit, ne? Und die wollen mir so bequem wie möglich machen. Ja, im Endeffekt benötigen sie mehr Schutz als ich, aber sie versuchen immer, mich zu beschützen. Manchmal nervt's.
Hast du Familie oder?
Ich habe Familie, ja. Also ich habe einen Sohn und eine Mutter, eine Schwester.
Was sagen die dazu, dass du hier bist?
Ich weiß es nicht. Ich habe es denen nicht gesagt.
Wofür kämpfst du?
Ich kämpfe ja nicht für mich oder für Deutschland oder für irgendeinen Privatmann oder sonst irgendwas, sondern ich kämpfe für das kurdische Volk. Das neue System hier mit der Redestruktur, Kommunenstruktur und das alles, das funktioniert wirklich. Wir haben Beispiele, Kobane funktioniert schon so.
Während Rustem und seine beiden Kameradinnen in dem Camp auf ihren nächsten Einsatz warten, fahre ich zurück nach Kobane, um mir anzuschauen, wie die Bevölkerung die völlig zerstörte Stadt wieder aufbaut. In Kobane treffe ich mich mit einem 25-jährigen Italiener, der vor über einem Jahr nach Rojava kam.
Can you describe a bit what's happening here? What's the daily life?
The process of the revolution is always hardest when you have actually to work with the civilian, make them understand what you fought for, make them understand a new way of thinking, a new way of living. You just have to look at the YPG to understand how big is the women's revolutions. And here you have women who actually fight and command entire squads, entire unit. You have women generals. If you have to summarize it, this is really our women's revolution.
Frauen kämpfen in Rojava nicht nur mit den Männern zusammen, sondern sie sollen auch in der Zivilgesellschaft die gleichen Rechte bekommen. Ich treffe mich mit der deutschen Maike. Sie arbeitet seit 8 Monaten als Sozialarbeiterin in einer Stiftung, die sich für die Gleichberechtigung in der Gesellschaft einsetzt.
Wie ist das denn in der Gesellschaft schon angekommen, die Gleichberechtigung von Männern und Frauen?
Dadurch, dass die Frauen auch zur Waffe gegriffen haben und eigentlich gegen den brutalsten Feind, den es gibt, also den IS, gekämpft haben, gibt es einen sehr großen Respekt und da hat sich natürlich auch viel gewandelt. Es gibt halt auch von Frauen gerade ein sehr starkes Bedürfnis, rauszugehen, die Gesellschaft mit neu aufzubauen, sich einzubringen.
Maike nimmt mich mit in eine der 4 Vorschulen, die die Frauenstiftung bereits aufgebaut hat.
Merhaba, ciao. Önce şöyle gelin. Unser Rock in Rojava.
Die Grundschule hier, die gehört zu der Frauenstiftung dazu, oder?
Die Kommunen, die sind halt auf uns zugekommen, haben gesagt, hier, wir haben da auch ein Haus, wo ihr das machen könnt, wo wir ganz gerne möchten, dass ihr halt eine Vorschule aufbaut für die Kinder des Stadtteils. Und dann haben wir mit Frauen aus dem Stadtteil gemeinsam hier die Vorschule aufgebaut.
Statt einer staatlichen Hierarchie organisieren die Kommunen das tägliche Leben selbst.
Das ist so wie Vorschule und Kindergarten, wo die halt sowohl Kurdisch als auch Arabisch lernen und eben auch eine Freundschaft zwischen den Kindern, also verschiedener Ethnien, aufbauen. Und eben auch gleich eine Förderung der Geschlechter, also dass es einfach eine Gleichberechtigung zwischen Jungs und Mädchen auch gibt.
Der Bürgerkrieg hat in Rojava fast das gesamte Bildungs- und Gesundheitswesen zerstört und die Türkei lässt kaum Baustoffe und Hilfsgüter über die Grenze.
The president has said it will take years, as he put it, to degrade and eventually destroy ISIS. He's been fairly cautious. Vice President Biden, not so much.
We will follow them to the gates of hell until they are brought to justice. Because hell is where they will reside. Hell is where they will reside.
Well, for the past several weeks, the gates of hell have had a very specific address, the town of Kobani in Syria, just across the border from here. But the U.S. and its allies didn't chase ISIS there until, according to senior U.S. military officials, it was almost too late. But Kobani is still holding on, as we found out when we visited the little city that stood up to ISIS. There are 2 things about Kobani that made this small Kurdish city in Syria the focus of international attention. The first is its location, just across the border from Turkey, which means the world's press has watched and reported as the ISIS onslaught reduced large parts of the city to smoking piles of rubble. The other is the heroic resistance of the people of Kobani. Theirs is a remarkable tale of courage under fire. It's a tale that couldn't be told because, surrounded and cut off from the world, Kobani was too dangerous for reporters to visit. A fact that was not lost on ISIS. In a slickly produced video, they introduced a report from Kobani.
Hello.
Presented by one of their hostages, British photojournalist John Cantley, who'd been forced to become a mouthpiece for his captors. In the video, he mocks reports of an ISIS retreat from parts of the city and the outlets that publish them.
The Western media, and I can't see any of their journalists here in the city of Kobani, have been saying recently that the Islamic State are on the retreat.
Cantley went on to claim that ISIS had control of 90% of the city and was now involved in mop-up operations. We decided to risk a trip into the besieged city to see for ourselves. Let's go. We crossed the no man's land and entered Kobani. What we found was a city demolished but undefeated. ISIS controls no more than 50% of Kobani, and American airstrikes are gradually reducing that area to rubble. Meanwhile, on the free side of the city, Kurdish men and women, outgunned and outnumbered, are not just standing their ground, they're smiling. 34-year-old Azima is a field commander on the southern front, where much of the fighting is happening. She takes us on a dangerous tour of the frontline positions. Now we run, she says. Sheets hung across intersections cloak our movements from enemy snipers. You stay low and run fast. Azimat leads us to City Hall. In Kobani now, you never enter a building through the front gate or the front door. She walks us to the council room, describing a recent battle to take the building back from ISIS.
She says there were about 40 ISIS fighters just in these rooms here. So it's not that they're fighting between buildings and across streets, but room to room. And you can see some of the damage. You can see the bullet holes. This was real close quarter fighting.
Azima shows us where the enemy is. Not far. We watch them all the time, she says, and make sure to shoot them before they get too close. Outside, I ask Azima why so many of her fighters are young women. As Kurdish women, she says, we would rather lose our lives than our land or our principles. Those principles are in evidence everywhere in Kobani. These fighters are members of the People's Protection Units. Women and men live together and fight together. There are no formal ranks, no organized units, and everyone calls each other comrade. The Kurds of Kobani are a throwback, progressive idealists in a region that may be descending into medieval darkness.
One way they found to avoid the snipers is by burrowing through buildings, just punching holes in the walls so they can move from place to place without exposing themselves to the open air and exposing themselves to the snipers.
We run up an exposed staircase to an apartment on the top floor of a residential building, where the bedrooms have been turned into snipers' nests. 26-year-old Vian was once a school teacher. Now she spends her days in this room, watching and trying to find the enemy just across the street. Born and raised in Kobani, Vian says leaving was never an option. Kobani is our home, she says. Where else would we go? We will stay here and fight. It's especially important, she says, for women to be strong in the Middle East, where they are rarely seen or heard from. We stand here as symbols of strength, she adds, for all the women of the region.
So you're fighting for Kobani and fighting for women's rights in the Middle East?
Yes, she says, right now I am fighting for Kobani, but I promised myself that wherever a minority is attacked, I will be there to fight for their rights. It's these grand ambitions that have made Kobani such an obsession for ISIS. The fundamentalists consider these people infidels, to be killed or enslaved. Most of the residents of Kobani and the surrounding villages, an estimated 200,000 people, escaped ahead of the ISIS advance, leaving behind their possessions and becoming refugees in nearby Turkey. Only the old, the sick, and the very stubborn still live here.
ISIS propaganda has been saying that there are no civilians left in Kobani, only fighters, and the streets do look pretty empty, but Mahmoud Ali is taking me inside his home to show that there are still civilians here, and his family is among them, and there are plenty of civilians. You can see these children. These are your neighbors, dol jiranek.
The house is crowded, and Ali says no one here is leaving. How could I leave my land and my people, Ali asks. My brothers and neighbors died to protect this place. How can I leave it? Those who remain here rely on a system of mutual assistance for everything. There is only one bakery in town, and the bread is distributed for free all around the city. The few doctors left in town treat the wounded in a makeshift clinic in an abandoned home. Even the weapons are a result of community organizing, like this homemade tank used to ferry fighters to the front lines. ISIS, on the other hand, has state-of-the-art weapons, including tanks and armored vehicles. The only reason Kobani survived this long is because the U.S. is conducting daily airstrikes and helped negotiate reinforcements from Iraqi Kurdistan and from the Free Syrian Army. But ISIS fighters are now dug into their positions in Kobani, and driving them out of an urban area is a challenge. But did it need to be this difficult? Only a few weeks ago, we were watching on a hill in Turkey along with refugees from Kobani who watched horrified as ISIS fighters closed in on the city. The militants made no effort to hide their movements. They were marching in without a care in the world.
These people are extremely frustrated by what's happening here. They see ISIS fighters in their villages, and they say if the Americans really want to bomb ISIS, they're not hard to find.
American officials said publicly at the time that defending Kobani was not a priority.
As horrific as it is to watch in real time what's happening in Kobani, it's also important to remember you have to step back and understand the strategic objective.
With the world's cameras trained on the city, the U.S. was eventually embarrassed into coming to the rescue. The city has now become a key battleground, a test case for the American strategy in the fight against ISIS. Dijwar Havat is a legendary fighter from Kobani. We are very grateful to America for the help it has sent us, he says, but it came very late, and we are going to need a lot more of it. For those who hold the line in Kobani, all this is just a distant echo. To pass the time, Vian sings a song of mourning for her fallen comrades. She knows that Kobani can only be remembered one of two ways, as the site of a heroic victory over ISIS, or as the site of a horrific massacre. Which is why everyone in Kobani, the old and the young, women and men, carries a special bullet around. They call it the bullet of honor and plan to use it to take their own life if the enemy manages to get through the line. Better that, they say, than falling into the hands of ISIS alive. A lot more to come from here tonight, live from Urfa, including an exclusive interview with Westerners.
Stream, as this mini-state doesn't levy any taxes, and the bank...
Cihan weiß nicht, ob er jemals nach Deutschland zurückkehren kann. Er bewegt sich in einer rechtlichen Grauzone. Die JPG, für die er kämpft, ist im Gegensatz zur PKK in Deutschland nicht verboten.
مثلا دبیجن باجاره اگر تدخل وی باجار بگیره عجیب نقطه یک فرق نینه چی کس مزن به بچوبه پلیسته تدسپیگ در دورا وی ریا علیکاری کود بگیرنه مثلا براکن ها اینی مسایه چی کس دبیجن هیزن نفنت وی آمدن ج کردان را استاتوی که بدن چی کس آمدن دبیجن شورش روجاوا بخن سالامی باشه naja, auch als Familie, auch kein Witzchen, ja, Mann.
Bevor du hier hingekommen bist, also warst du lange bei der Antifa?
Antifa, autonome Szene, solche Aktivitäten. Am Ende halt internationalistische Politik. Im Frühjahr 2012 haben die Freunde uns dann gefragt, ob wir nicht nach Kurdistan gehen wollen. Als ich das erste Mal in den Norden gefahren bin, habe ich halt verstanden, so, dass sie das leben, woran sie glauben. Und das hat mich überzeugt, dass die kurdische Bewegung halt Revolution macht. Revolution im Sinne von wirkliche grundsätzliche Veränderung der Gesellschaft. Als dann in Deutschland einige alte Lebensstrukturen, persönliche Dinge zusammenbrachen, so, habe ich halt gemerkt, dass ein weiteres Leben in den Widersprüchen des Systems für mich keinen Sinn mehr macht. Entweder du sagst dir halt so, scheiß drauf, dann lebe ich halt falsch. Oder du sagst dir halt so, nee, es muss eine Alternative geben. Und ich war halt nicht bereit, darauf zu scheißen. So.
Und dann bist du hier hingefahren.
This is Raqqa, the capital of the world's newest declared state. A state that has been established by a hardline Sunni jihadist group that emerged out of the mayhem of the Syrian civil war. Until recently, they were known as ISIS. Now they simply call themselves the Islamic State, or IS. The speed and efficiency with which they advanced from Syria into Iraq caught the world and many of those reporting on it by surprise.
The lightning advance of ISIS in Iraq, President Obama's foreign policy, is maybe under attack like never before.
how it was possible for this group ISIS to sort of sweep in to western Iraq.
They captured the cities of Mosul and Tikrit, robbing local banks and seizing large amounts of weapons provided to the Iraqi military by the United States. Growing in numbers, its fighters have come from all over the world, all wanting to be part of the Caliphate, an Islamic state that now stretches through Syria and Iraq. And they say this is just the beginning.
Ja, Raqqa ist 50 Kilometer nur noch in diese Richtung. Habt ihr vor, da bald hinzugehen?
Raqqa ist eines der strategischen Zentren von Daesh in Syrien und wir werden auch nach Raqqa gehen. Denn de facto gibt es gerade im Mittleren Osten keine andere militärische Kraft, die in der Lage ist, Daesh zu vernichten.
Seit den Attentaten in Paris fliegen immer mehr andere Länder Luftangriffe. Hilft euch das?
Es ist natürlich eine Unterstützung. Es macht vor allem psychischen Druck auf den Feind. Aber um wirklich die Organisationsstruktur von Daesh zu zerschlagen, reicht das nicht. Braucht es Bodentruppen. Aber wir machen es nicht um jeden Preis. Was für die kurdische Bewegung dabei rausspringen muss, ist die Akzeptanz der westkurdischen Revolution auf der internationalen Ebene. Also solange es da halt keine Veränderungen gibt, sehen wir es nicht ein, dass wir uns als Kanonenfutter benutzen lassen. Deswegen ist die Frage, wann es nach Raqqa geht, keine militärische Frage, sondern eine politische Frage.
Doch wie soll es zu einer politischen Lösung kommen? Der NATO-Partner Türkei wird ein selbstverwaltetes kurdisches Gebiet kaum dulden.
Everyone we've met has given us a different reason for why they're fighting. The ordinary farmers we've met say they're fighting to defend their farms, defend their homes, their land, their families. Christians we've met say they're trying to preserve the Syria that used to be a kind of place where people of all religions, languages, ethnicities mingled, coexisted together. Even here in Rojava, a place that for the past 2 years, while the rest of the country's been torn apart, preserved a kind of peace. Now it's seeing this, constant fighting, every day new funerals, new martyrs. It's hard to see how this is going to end.
Greetings, citizens of the world, we are anonymous. As many of you have heard, Turkey is supporting ISIS by buying oil from them, and hospitalizing their fighters.
خدای بنده به مقاله ابرار نکشم میره بودی نه سری من
For a while now, there's been rumors that the Turkish government helped ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Well, now the evidence is in, and we're much closer to a final judgment. So let me tell you about that. The Business Insider writes, NATO member Turkey has long been accused by experts, Kurds, and even Joe Biden of enabling ISIS by turning a blind eye to the vast smuggling networks of weapons and fighters during the ongoing Syrian war. Now, that's one element of it. And if it turns out that people were making money on the border and the Turkish government was turning a blind eye to it, well, that would be bad. That would be really bad. But it's a different level if they actually cooperated with ISIS in the first place. Now we have further evidence on that. Original reporting from The Guardian and Business Insider explains. A U.S.-led raid on the compound housing the Islamic State's chief financial officer produced evidence that Turkish officials directly dealt with ranking ISIS members. Uh-oh, that's not good. Now, more evidence. Documents and flash drives seized during the Sayaf raid reportedly revealed links so clear and, quote, undeniable between Turkey and ISIS that they could end up having profound policy implications for the relationship between us and Ankara, senior Western official familiar with the captured intelligence told The Guardian. So that is also fairly weighty and important. Now, more. The move by the ruling AKP party, that's Erdogan's party, was apparently part of the ongoing attempts to trigger the downfall of Syrian President Bashar Assad's regime. Now, let's pause there to say that, okay, for some folks, you can understand why Turkey would be motivated to go in that direction. They're against Assad's government. Assad was a dictator in Syria. He's Shia. The Turks are Sunni. So these are old battles, and we understand. And remember also that here in the United States, a lot of people pushed for help, including military help, to the rebels fighting against Assad. Some of those rebels turned out to be ISIS. So perhaps the U.S., or at least some forces, including right-wing forces in America, would have made the same mistake. So that is also fair to point out. Now, at the same time, the level of cooperation here seems to be a little bit more detailed. Now, we go to a former ISIS member that talked to Newsweek. ISIS commanders told us to fear nothing at all because there was full cooperation with the Turks. ISIS saw the Turkish army as its ally, especially when it came to attacking the Kurds in Syria. Now, not only was the Turkish government against Bashar Assad government in Syria, but they were also against the Kurds in Syria and oftentimes in Iraq. So if ISIS was fighting their two enemies, they might have considered them to be an ally of sorts.
I've been a millionaire before, but it doesn't matter. I've been an anarchist for a decade. There's an actual anarchist revolution happening in the Middle East, of all places. If I didn't go and join that, I'd be a hypocrite.